Jackson Pollock was the first American painter to capture the popular imagination. The Pollock myth was that of the cowboy, born and raised on the plains of Wyoming, who became the star of the New York art world until his death in a drunken car crash in 1956 at the age of 44. Pollock was always controversial. His famous drip paintings earned him notoriety and abuse, but little financial reward. Yet Pollock produced a body of work which broke with European tradition and helped found the movement which made Americans the new leaders of the international art world.
My home is in Springs, East Hampton, Long Island. I was born in Cody, Wyoming, 39 years ago. My painting is direct. I usually paint on the floor. I enjoy working on a large canvas. I feel more at home, more at ease in a big area. Having the canvas on the floor, I feel nearer, more a part of the painting. Sometimes I use a brush, but often prefer using a stick. Sometimes I pour the paint straight out of the can. I like to use a dripping, fluid paint. A method of painting is the natural growth out of a need. I want to express my feelings rather than illustrate them. Technique is just a means of arriving at a statement.
In 1946, Jackson Pollock and his wife, the painter Lee Krasner, had moved to East Hampton, Long Island. The small town of Springs was where they decided to make their home, and this is where Pollock was to do much of his greatest work. Many of the other young New York painters, a generation which would become known as the abstract expressionists, soon followed him out there.
The social life among the artists was one of continual, almost nightly, drunken, large parties. When I think about it now, I don't know how they went on in this fashion. Everyone was totally drunk all the time and was driving around in cars. The Hemingway mystique was very much in force. Of course, Hemingway's a big alcoholic. And it was the idea, I believe, that since artists did have such a limp-wristed image in the American view, that their manhood, by doing something as delicate as creating art or writing a poem, was threatened, and they had to overcompensate, all of them, by being super macho. And they were strong, ugly men. They weren't cutie pies at all. Again, this was right after World War II, and the men had come home, and they were supposed to all settle down with nice families in suburbs. And I think that the writers and artists were men and women who didn't fit into that role at all, but didn't know how to get out of it without seeming too bizarre.
Despite bouts of drinking and depression, Jackson Pollock felt at home here in Springs. In the years between 1946 and 1951, he was to produce many of his greatest works, perfecting the technique of all-over painting, for which he was to become famous.
In Pollock's greatest paintings, I think the energy is clearly there, that whiplash line, the gestures, etc. But there's also a feeling of being able to enter these paintings because they are big. There's, with all the energy, a great calm. It's not just a feeling of grandness, but also a feeling of intimacy and quiet. One of his greatest paintings, Lavender Mist, I think is one of the most calm and lyrical paintings that an American ever painted.
This place, in a funny way, is it's a bit inhabited with Jackson still. He felt one with this view. And he once, in fact, said that what amazed him about being here in a seacoast area on an island, surrounded by water, the ocean on one side, the bay on the other, was that although you looked at water and marsh, you could still, because of the flatness, have the feeling of plains, even maybe of desert. So it hooked in nicely with his childhood out there in Wyoming.
Jackson Pollock was born on a sheep ranch in Cody, Wyoming on January 28, 1912. It was a poor family, and Jackson was the youngest of 5 boys.
His father was a rather shy, rather weak in many ways, and unsuccessful itinerant farmer and surveyor. And in Pollock's early life, the family traveled around a great deal. They would look for fruit farms one place and a surveying job the next place. The mother was, even from photographs, I think you'd feel a much more powerful woman, with some interest in the arts, in terms of crafts arts. During the summer, he would generally work with his father. One of the areas his father had a job was surveying the rim of the Grand Canyon. And I have a feeling the surveying work particularly was a big influence on Pollock's feeling for space. I think that sense of American space, scale, size, had a tremendous impact on Pollock's work. I also think the mobility itself, the speed, the energy, was all part of the American experience, and I think is not unique to Pollock, although I feel that his particular image expressed it so well.
Jackson had been in trouble in school from an early age, but in 1928 he enrolled at the Manual Arts High School in Los Angeles, and shortly afterwards met another young student, Reuben Kadish.
One of the worst situations that young artists can grow up in creatively was present in Southern California. It was very repressive. It was more than just academic. It was mediocre. About the healthiest and most energetic thing that was taking place there was the Disney operation. There was absolutely no regard, let's say, for the energy and the vigor of what was currently taking place in France, for instance, and in Mexico. One of the first things I think that I felt about Jackson's work is that it was energetic and it was vigorous. And it did have a very intense communicative power. When we went to museums, like the Los Angeles County Museum, we didn't go see the show that the LA County Art Association put on, but we went down to the cellar to take a look at the graphic stuff, you know.
Their imagination fired by the ethnic art they had seen, the two boys went on camping trips together, watching the sand painting rituals of the American Indians and learning more about the native tradition. It had an energy and directness that was to inspire their own work.
These are the kind of things that meant a great deal to me. The fact that Pollock saw that I had a piece like this and held it in very high reverence really helped to cement a relationship. There was a lot that we found that we could identify with each other.
At the end of 1930, Jackson Pollock came to New York. He enrolled at the Art Students League and moved in with his brother Charles and his wife Elizabeth.
Well, in the 30s, which was during the Great Depression period in New York City, I suppose we were desperately poor, but we were very happy. It was an exciting time. We had no rewarding results, but we all thought we were going to do impressive things. I met Charles Pollock, who was the eldest of the 5 Pollock boys, and Jackson was the youngest. When he first arrived, I thought he was the most beguiling physically of any of the Pollock boys, with a flashing smile, which I later learned was a ploy of his as he manipulated people. But in the beginning, I was ingratiated by him. But gradually, I soured on Jackson because I saw he was exploitative, manipulative, selfish, and lazy. His ploy was to go around the Manhattan like a cowboy, hinting of his cowboy past. I think Jackson had a sense of the outdoors and loved nature in a general sort of sentimental fashion, romantic fashion, I should say, but he never participated in things that men in the West did. He was coddled, was part of his problem.
Jackson Pollock was clearly unsure of himself at this time and uncertain of his direction as a painter. As was to happen so often in his life, he was looking for a strong person to direct him. His first teacher was Thomas Hart Benton, the regional painter whose emphasis on the real America influenced Pollock's own work when he first came to New York. In 1935, Pollock joined the government's Federal Art Project, where he met more experimental painters and had the chance to work with his heroes, the Mexican muralists.
Diego Rivera, Orozco, Siqueiros. For one thing, they liberated artists, American artists, in terms of scale. They worked on a huge scale. And the WPA artists who were doing murals in post offices coast to coast were very influenced by the Mexican way of dividing a surface and composing and juxtaposing and so on. Siqueiros was one of the first artists to use enamel and industrial materials, and it would drip and so on. And Jackson Pollock was very definitely influenced by his working with Siqueiros.
The first time I met Siqueiros, one of the first things that I asked him, I knew that he'd been cultural attaché in Paris, was, did you ever meet Picasso? You know, those were stars, those were gods. We worshipped the Europeans. They opened up more possibilities to break away from the idea of the narrative kind of mediocrity that we were used to seeing and being told that that's what great art is all about.
Pollock and the other New York painters strove for a more abstract form of expression. Painters such as William de Kooning, Robert Motherwell, Achille Gorky and Franz Klein, a generation which is to become known as the abstract expressionists. Many of them were given their first chance to exhibit by the collector, Peggy Guggenheim.
There's where American painting got started. After all, look whom she was the first to show.
Pollock got his first commission, which was to do a portable mural for the foyer of the apartment house Peggy Guggenheim lived in. She didn't own it, and the mural was portable, and I saw it and shortly after it was hung, and I thought this made me suspect that Pollock was a great painter. The picture seems to repeat itself all over. It's become a staple of abstract painting now, but at the time, it was called as exalted wallpaper, and then the mural, well, it just goes on and on. That's what made it so good. I think he needed to paint big later on because he didn't want to start with the shape of the format of the canvas, as Cézanne had taught us all to do. He felt, well, you can see that every paint stroke in the mature Cézanne is more or less echoes the format, the rectangularity. And so Pollock wanted to get free of that, so when he'd spread a canvas on the floor, as he took to doing, he didn't want to have that damn rectangle in his field of vision so soon. It was as though he wanted to find his way to it.
Well, Mr. Pollock, can you tell us how modern art came into being?
It didn't jump out of the blue. It's a part of a long tradition, beginning back with Cézanne, up through the Cubists, the post-Cubists, to the painting being done today.
Well, it's definitely a product of evolution.
Yes.
And we go back to this method question, which so many people to think is important. Can you tell us how you developed your method of painting and why you paint as you do?
Well, method seems to me, a natural growth out of a need. And from a need, the modern artist has found new ways of expressing the world about him. I happen to find ways that are different from the usual techniques of painting, which seems a little strange at the moment, but I don't think there's anything very different about it. I paint on the floor, and which isn't unusual, because the Orientals did that.
As a painter, Pollock was in control, constantly pushing forward his technique. But he seemed unable to take responsibility for his own life. He turned to women for support. Peggy Guggenheim was his patron, and the painter Lee Krasner, who later became his wife, encouraged him and introduced him to like-minded painters.
When I brought Hoffman up to meet Pollock for the first time, because I thought, you know, here's someone that would certainly understand the work. Hoffman says, you are very talented, you should join my class. Then Hoffman said, but to Pollock, but you do not work from nature. This is no good, you will repeat yourself. You work by heart, not from nature. And Jackson's response to that is, I am nature.
The modern artist is living in a mechanical age. And we have mechanical means of representing objects in nature, such as the camera and the photograph. The modern artist, it seems to me, is working and expressing an inner world. In other words, expressing the energy, the motion, and other inner forces.
Would it be possible to say that the classical artist expressed his world by representing the objects, whereas the modern artist expresses his world by representing the effect the objects have upon him?
Yes, the modern artist is working with space and time and expressing his feelings rather than illustrating.
I think that much of Pollock's imagery comes from the unconscious, and he accepted that and had come to that as an aesthetic in several ways. From, if I remember correctly, 1937 on, he was in and out of analysis the rest of his life. Another thing was the tremendous influence of surrealism in the years when Pollock first came to New York, so that between psychiatry, surrealism, what he'd seen of Indian rituals in the West, Pollock had pretty much formed a basic conviction that the unconscious was where art came from.
Pollock got little critical recognition as he struggled to find an individual direction.
Pollock was using anything and everything that he could get a hold of. There was a great search for a new kind of excitement in materials. If you threw your paint across or whatever it was, if it brought a new phenomena into being, then it was worthwhile.
How do you go about getting the paint on the canvas? I understand you don't use brushes or anything of that sort, do you?
Well, most of the paint I use is a liquid flowing kind of paint. The brushes I use are more as sticks rather than as a brush. The brush doesn't touch the surface of the canvas. It's just above.
Well, isn't it more difficult to control than a brush?
No, I don't think so. With experience, it seems to be possible to control the flow of the paint to a great extent. And I don't use the accident, as I deny the accident.
He could fling a skein of paint with the accuracy of a cowboy with a lasso. And that cowboy business, I mean, I don't like to bring that in, the business of Jackson as a Western, and that's part of myth, convenient myth. But he did acquire marvelous control over that stick he would use and to fling paint. And then he'd use a basting syringe. Big basting syringe. Well, basting syringes aren't big. And he had a lot more control than the myth would have. We had as much control as you need to make good art.
Quite a few artists were working on large canvases, but American artists had no response critically. Clem Greenberg came along, and Clem Greenberg is the granddaddy of hype in the art world. Clem was the first person to say about an American artist, "This is the greatest artist." So Clem single-handedly began to open up the world of publicity because Life magazine ran an article that was supposed to be sarcastic, with this photograph of Jackson Pollock, and of course it captured the imagination of the public. And definitely part of Jackson's success was his cowboy image and throwing paint down and reckless and abandoned and so on. It was an exciting image.